Welcome back, Sebastian here, and today I want to discuss Daniel Ricciardo, Liam Lawson, and Red Bull RB's big decision, big dilemma with regards to their second seat at RB for 2025. So of course at this point, as of the recording of this video, Yuki Tsunoda has already been signed for RB for 2025. However, his teammate is still undecided, and really it feels like it's come down to two drivers, Daniel Ricciardo and Liam Lawson. And today I want to make the case for both of them, why both of them kind of deserve to be Yuki Tsunoda's teammate in 2025. And I also want to kind of go over some stats as well, as is typical in my video. So we're going to go over the stats first. So first we'll talk about Daniel Ricciardo. So 35 years of age, he'll be 35 at the start of next season. And versus in 16 races this year against Yuki Tsunoda, his qualifying record is 6-10, so losing the qualifying battle head-to-head there. Median qualifying gap is 0.094 seconds, so just a bit below a tenth of a second. Average starting position, he is again a little bit behind there, 12.63 compared to 12.58 for Sonoda. So all across the board, this year against Sonoda, and again, very quite similar to the numbers in the 7 races last year. Ricciardo's just a little bit off Sonoda's pace in qualifying. However, in the races, it's a little bit closer. In the races where both drivers have finished, Ricciardo is behind 6-7, so only one race difference. But in terms of points, quite a big difference there, 12 to 22. And Sonoda really got a lot of his points in the first 7-8 races or so, when the RB was consistently, I would say, the 6th best car on the grid, and Ricciardo, for whatever reason, was really struggling at that time. And now I would say the last, I think since Canada at least, the RB, or at least Ricciardo and Sonoda have been pretty evenly matched, but the RB has not been as strong as Ricciardo. It hasn't been as strong as Haas, hasn't been as strong as Williams even, or Alpine at certain tracks. And then average finishing position, 11.9 for Ricciardo, 12.2 for Sonoda, so actually a little bit ahead there. So basically all these stats are really showing Ricciardo's a little bit behind in qualifying performance against Sonoda, and in race pace, very close, but you know, it seems like Sonoda is at least able to get those bigger points paying finishes. I'm gonna skip the last 2 points about Ricciardo, and then we're gonna talk about Lawson, and we'll get to those a little bit later. So for Lawson, 22 years of age. Last year he of course stood in for Daniel Ricciardo 4 or 5 races because of Ricciardo's hand injury. In those 5 races, qualifying 0 and 5, out-qualified all 5 occasions. Median qualifying delta 0.304 seconds, and then average starting position 13.8 for Sonoda, 14.0 for Lawson. Quite close, and a lot of that is actually because Sonoda didn't start one race, and that would have brought his number up a little bit, or improved his number a little bit. And there was another race where Sonoda was blocked, I think in one of the qualifying laps, or I think it was Q2 in Singapore last year. He didn't set a representative lap time, so I took the lap time from Q1 to determine the head-to-head. So that's kind of the 2 races out of 5, and again, very small sample size. But generally across the board, Lawson was not as good in qualifying as Sonoda, but that's to be expected. History tells us that generally when rookie drivers come in mid-season, especially in qualifying, they're not as good as their much more experienced teammates. We saw that with Ocon in 2016 with Pascal Wehrlein as his teammate. We saw that with Daniel Ricciardo as well, 2011, with Tonio Liuzzi as their teammates, as his teammate. And again, you know, both drivers in their first full season would do much better than those numbers in that first kind of abbreviated season would indicate. So again, these qualifying numbers you can definitely take with a big pinch of salt, small sample size, and the fact that Lawson was coming in mid-season. In the race though, this is where the numbers are actually quite interesting. So in the races, Lawson was ahead 2-1 in races where both drivers finished. Points, again, 2 for Lawson, none for Sonoda across that 5 race span. Of course, that was a 9th place finish in Singapore. An average finishing position 12.2 for Lawson, 13.25 for Sonoda. So again, quite interesting that Lawson coming in as a fresh rookie. In 5 races, he was able to actually beat Sonoda in head-to-head, beat him in points, and beat him in finishing position as well. And again, there was a lot of people that at this time last year, myself included, arguing that Lawson deserved a spot on the 2024 F1 grid. That, of course, did not come. Talking about why that didn't happen, I think there's a lot of different factors that were involved in that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But of course, very, very small sample size. So I think for Lawson's F1 candidacy for 2025, this is going to be a big part. He can take his 2023 experience, his 5 races against Sonoda, and say, I did quite well in these circumstances as a rookie. I deserve a full-time seat. And I think, he has a very good case for that. But I want to talk about his time in F2 a little bit. So 2021 and 2022, those were his 2 seasons in F2. And I want to talk about his qualifying numbers here. So here I've gotten median pole gap, and these are numbers I've been calculating the last couple of days. But 2021, median pole gap, 0.601 seconds, and that ranked 6 on the grid, and it was the 3rd rookie, so behind Oscar Piastri and Théo Pourchaire. 2022, it improved slightly, not a whole lot, but improved to 0.59 seconds, and that ranked 8th on the grid. So actually, in terms of ranking, it actually fell from 6th to 8th. And then when you look at kind of the championship results, the race totals, 2021 he finished 9th in the championship, 103 points. He was the 4th place rookie behind Piastri, Pourchaire, and Yuri Vips. 2022, 3rd in the championship, 149 points. And I believe he was again second place driver amongst the year 2 drivers behind Théo Pourchaire as well. So in the races, you see that really strong progression. Top 10 result rookie season, 3rd place in your 2nd season, pretty good result. Again, 3rd place in your 2nd season, that's the same result that Alex Albon had in his 2nd season F2. So again, it shows that even if you do finish, even if you don't win your 2nd year, you can still have a very good F1 career even with that kind of result. But I want to look at the qualifying. The qualifying, I think, is the real thing that's holding Lawson back, and I think is the reason he didn't get the F1 promotion in 2022, and that's why we saw Nick DeVries on the grid. So I have 3 drivers here. I would have liked to include a bit more data, but this is the only data that I have that fits this criteria. So I have 3 drivers. All of them in their 2nd year of F2, and coincidentally all of them in 2020. So we have Zhou Guanyu, Mick Schumacher, and Nikita Mazepin. So for Zhou Guanyu, 2nd year in F2, his median pole gap was 0.441 seconds. Mick Schumacher, 2nd year in F2, median pole gap, despite winning the championship, 0.496 seconds. Nikita Mazepin, 2020, 2nd year in the championship, median pole gap, 0.556 seconds. And you compare that to Liam Lawson's median pole gap in his 2nd year is worse than all 3 of those drivers. I think all 3 of those drivers, most people would accept, are definitely below average qualifiers. And I think that's really the big question with Liam Lawson. Is this qualifying going to be good enough in F1 for him to be a good, above average F1 driver? And I think really that's the question that Red Bull are going to be have been asking themselves for the last 2 years or so, since Lawson really put himself in the position to be promoted to F1. Now, the other pieces of information I want to put on, so 2021, with his F2 rookie season, Red Bull decided to put him in DTM. He does very, very well there, finishes 2nd, actually beats Alex Albon there. Should have won. Events happened that final race, we don't need to discuss them again. 2023, again, after that 2nd year in F2, Red Bull decided to put him in Super Formula in Japan. He finishes 2nd as a rookie, very, very impressive result, very reminiscent of Pierre Gasly's rookie season in Super Formula in, I think that was 2017 it was. And again, he's with those results in DTM and Super Formula, he's shown very good adaptability, something that for whatever reason, one reason or another, didn't show up that 1st year in Formula 2. So I've talked about Ricciardo a bit, I've talked about Lawson a bit. Again, I want to go back to this time last year when we were discussing who should be the drivers for AlphaTauri RB for 2024. We know Sonoda was performing, I think, relatively well, of course, with 3 different teammates last year. it was kind of an easier season, I think, in terms of just absolute comparisons. We know Honda wanted to keep him on as a Japanese driver, and I do think that had a bit of an impact on him getting that seat in 2024. Daniel Ricciardo, with those 7 races, of course, with the hand injury as well, it was kind of a write-off. The 7 races he did last season, the results were okay, not spectacular, I would say, not, overwhelmingly deserving of a promotion to Red Bull, the parent team, but they weren't like absolutely awful either. And then you have Lawson, who showed up in 5 races, arguably outperforms Yuki Sonoda, and again, I think it really came down to those 2 drivers. Now, I put in the number of Instagram followers on the board for this particular reason. So on Instagram, Daniel Ricciardo has 9.2 million followers. Liam Lawson, 666,000 subscribers. An absolutely massive difference, almost an order of magnitude, actually more than an order of magnitude difference between those 2 drivers. And again, the big rumor this time last year was that RB, the Red Bull parent company, had signed these massive sponsorship agreements with various companies. We later find out to be Visa, for example, where they basically signed these agreements with these companies on the condition that Daniel Ricciardo, the super popular, super marketable driver, would be driving in one of their cars next year. And I think really, while it was never really said outright by anyone at Red Bull, this was always kind of the speculation that basically Red Bull had basically boxed themselves into a corner of signing Sonoda, a Japanese driver, pleases Honda, signing Ricciardo, very marketable, very popular driver, please sponsors, and then Lawson kind of just showed up and did much better than I think many people expected in those 5 races against Sonoda. Now again, coming into 2024, many people were I think at Red Bull were hoping, Daniel Ricciardo will have an excellent year. He'll put that wrist injury, that hand injury behind him. He'll have a great year. Perhaps he will replace Sergio Perez for 2025. And that really hasn't happened. Perez has had a pretty poor year. I've talked about that in July. But I think with how chaotic things are at Red Bull right now, and I think with the fact that you have neither Sonoda, neither Ricciardo have really been, absolutely superstar level drivers. I feel this year, they've both been good, arguably. Sonoda arguably a little bit better than Ricciardo, but none of them have really been neither driver has massively outperformed the other and really kind of merited a promotion to a team like Red Bull where it's so cutthroat, the pressure is so immense. And I think that's kind of left them in a sticky situation where, we know they've signed Sonoda already for 2025. I think, he deserves that contract again for 2025. Had a very, very good first quarter of the season. Second quarter of the season's been a little bit more iffy, but quite tight between himself and Ricciardo. But, I think all things considered, I think he deserves that extension. Now for Ricciardo, at this point in time, he's 35 years of age. He's probably not going to get better in the coming seasons than he is right now. And again, if he's being outqualified by Sonoda, if he's about equal on points, how much more growth is there really? And again, what place does he have in a team like RB, which, at its core is a junior team, and sometimes they'll say it's a sister team, but really it's a team that's there to promote young drivers and assess their ability to drive for Red Bull in the future. And again, I don't think Ricciardo's really shown in the last year and a half, last year or so, that he's going to be able to get back to Red Bull. We know he at his peak, he was an excellent driver, finished 3rd in the World Drivers' Championship 2014, 2016, 8 wins in his career, 32 podiums, 3 pole positions, all these great stats. And I think there's a lot of nostalgia within Red Bull for those years at Red Bull between 2014 and 2018, where he was, such a good driver, such a captivating, marketable driver. And again, I think off track, that magic is still there. On track, I'm not so sure. And so, they have a very, very difficult, position that they've put themselves in. And so, finishing off this video, I want to make 3 arguments for Ricciardo and 3 arguments for Liam Lawson. So I think we'll start, we'll just do one each at a time. And we'll start from the bottom. So I think for number 3 for Ricciardo, we're going to try writing on this. I'm going to go with qualifying Ricciardo. I think for Lawson, qualifying is still a big question mark for him. Of course, out-qualified 0.5 against Sonoda 2023. And again, with that F2 data, I think there are still good reasons to have some question marks about his ability in qualifying. For Ricciardo, the qualifying again is not quite as strong as Sonoda, but I think given everything we know in theory about Lawson's ability in qualifying, I think you can still take that as an advantage for Ricciardo and a reason perhaps why he should stay in F1, stay with RB for 2025. All right, number 3 for Lawson, I'm going to go with higher ceiling. So for Lawson, I feel at this point in time, if you project out to how Lawson and Ricciardo could develop in the next 4 to 5 years, I think Lawson would have the higher ceiling just based on how things play out right now. Looking 2 to 3 years in the future, Ricciardo would be 38 years old, Lawson would be 25. At that point, Lawson would be in the prime of his career, or entering the prime of his career at least, and for Ricciardo, he would be really on the downswing. I think if you're looking at like a more long-term move, I think realistically, at this point in time, just looking at Ricciardo's statistics against Sonoda, he's just not really blowing Sonoda away. He's a little bit behind in qualifying, about the same in race pace. And again, because of that, I do think at this point, if you put Lawson in, looking 2 to 3 years down the line, I think Lawson would probably have the higher ceiling of the two drivers. Now, number 2, I kind of alluded to this earlier when I talked about the social media numbers, but I think from a pure marketing perspective and ability to bring sponsors in, that kind of thing, Ricciardo is definitely the better driver to have. And while it may sound kind of cruel and may sound like I'm saying that Ricciardo's a pay driver, it's not necessarily that Ricciardo's the one who's bringing the sponsors. It's that sponsors see that Ricciardo's at this team and they want to sponsor the team because they know how popular he is, they know how many people know who he is. All right, number 2 for Lawson. I'm going to go with adaptability. We've seen with Lawson time in DTM, time in Super Formula, and again, even with those 5 races in F1 last year, he's a very adaptable driver. He's able to go into new series, or at least in the last several years, he's been able to go into new series and do very, very well with very little preparation. And again, with Ricciardo, it's something that, again, has been a bit of a question mark of his last 4 or 5 years, I would say. The time at McLaren was definitely quite poor. And again, the rumor was that, McLaren was quite an understeery car, and that for whatever reason, Ricciardo, who prefers cars that are a bit more oversteery, he just couldn't adapt to those understeery cars, and that's why he saw his performance suffer. And again, some people would say as well that this year's RB is also a bit understeery, which is why Ricciardo struggled so much the first quarter of the season. So again, if you have a car and it's understeery, and if Ricciardo is going to be struggling with that, then why would you want a driver who's perhaps going to be not able to adapt to all sets of different conditions between neutral, oversteery, understeery, that kind of thing. Now, number 1 for Ricciardo. Number 1 for Ricciardo, I'm going to go with experience. We know Ricciardo is such an experienced driver. Over 200, I believe, over 250 Grand Prix starts to his name, and again, he can use that to help the team. He can use that to help him grow. I think if you bring Ricciardo back for 2025, the floor for what the performance will be for next year is definitely going to be higher than what Lawson's floor. If Lawson struggles for whatever reason, struggles in qualifying, struggles to get to grips to F1 full time, I think his floor is probably a bit lower than Ricciardo's floor for next year. That is to say that I think Ricciardo is more of a known quantity than Lawson is. We know that his experience, we know he should be able to be okay. Hopefully he can be great, but I think at the very least we think he'll be at least okay for next year. And again, there have been a lot of questions about Ricciardo's ability to help develop cars because of I guess in the words of other people, he's not the most technically minded, and he kind of drives based on feel and less based on what's actually going on with the car from an engineering perspective. But again, I think Ricciardo's definitely the much more experienced driver, and that's definitely an asset for him that he could use to base his candidacy on. Now, for Lawson, then kind of the opposite of Ricciardo's, but I'm going to go with youth. And that kind of comes out in several ways. One, it really brings Red Bull, or this Faenza team, back to its roots as a young driver team, as a junior team, having two youngish drivers in Sonoda and in Lawson. And again, kind of like the opposite of what I said with Ricciardo, because he's a young driver, we don't really know what he can do in F1, and so his ceiling, based on what he did last year against Sonoda, what he did in DTM Super Formula, and even to an extent what he did in F2, he has a pretty high ceiling of what he could do, of what his potential is. And so I think those two things kind of are definitely things that are in his favor at this point, especially with the fact that Ricciardo's performances have not been, spectacular. If this was a comparison between Liam Lawson and, Max Verstappen, let's say, of course, you could, even if you argue that said junior driver Liam Lawson has a super high ceiling, the comparison, the benchmark is such a high standard that it's basically impossible for that young driver to meet said benchmark. So there you go. This is something that we perhaps will get a conclusion in the next couple weeks or so. Again, it said that Liam Lawson's contract has a clause in it that if he's not offered an F1 seat for 2025 by the end of September, that he basically becomes a free agent and he can go somewhere else, perhaps Audi. And again, that's perhaps why Audi are waiting for, haven't decided on a driver yet for their other vacant seat alongside Nico Hülkenberg. But again, this is something that we should get a conclusion to in the next couple of weeks. It'll be very interesting to see what Red Bull decide to do with Ricciardo, what they decide to do with Lawson. And again, this of course will have pretty big implications on the F1 driver market, and again for what F1 will look like in 2025. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it and you want to see more, please like and subscribe. It's always appreciated. Anyway, that's all for today. Goodbye.